I see through your charade. You are quite beautiful, despite your efforts to convince everyone otherwise.
For 36 months, she painted her skin with ash, wore dresses that smelled of mothballs, and faked a spine-chilling cough. Society called her the Beast of Mayfair. It was the perfect disguise to escape a forced marriage until the Duke of Westmoreland offered his hand and wiped the ash away. The rain lashed against the towering glass windows of the Croft townhouse in Grosvenor Square, mirroring the storm that had just shattered 19-year-old Genevieve Croft's life. It was November of 1811, and her father, Lord Thomas Croft, a shipping magnate whose fleet rivaled the East India Company, was dead. Sitting in the dim mahogany-paneled library, Genevieve gripped the edges of her black mourning dress. Across from her sat her stepmother, Lady Henrietta, a woman whose beauty was as sharp and unforgiving as broken glass. Beside Henrietta lounged her nephew, Lord Percival Finch. Percival was a man of grotesque habits, a notorious gambler with rotting teeth, a penchant for cruel jokes, and hands that perpetually clammy and seeking. Mr. Henry Tolling, the family solicitor, cleared his throat, adjusting his spectacles as he read the final codicil of Lord Croft's will. To my beloved daughter Genevieve, I leave the entirety of my estate, the shipping fleet, and the sum of £300,000 in the Bank of England. Tolling paused, swallowing hard. However, this inheritance is held in trust by Lady Henrietta until Genevieve's 22nd birthday. Should Genevieve marry before that date, the groom shall assume immediate control of the assets. Should she remain unwed by the stroke of midnight on her 22nd birthday, she inherits entirely and autonomously. Henrietta's lips curled into a predatory smile. Genevieve's heart plummeted into her stomach. "Well," Henrietta purred, her voice dripping with venomous sweetness, "it is a blessing that my dear nephew Percival has already asked for Genevieve's hand. We shall have the wedding by Christmas. The fortune will stay securely within the family." Percival winked at Genevieve, his tongue darting out to wet his lips. "I look forward to taming you, cousin." Genevieve felt the bile rise in her throat. She knew exactly what would happen if she married Percival. He would squander her father's life's work on the faro tables of James's Street, and she would likely be locked away in some crumbling country estate, or worse, meet an accidental demise on a steep staircase once she had produced an heir. She had 3 years until her 22nd birthday. 3 years to survive. If she flatly refused the marriage, Henrietta had the legal right as her guardian to make her life a living hell, starve her, beat her, or drag her to the altar by her hair. She needed a deterrent, something so repulsive that even a man as greedy as Percival would hesitate, hoping another suitor might take the bait, or preferring to wait until the last possible moment to claim his prize. She needed to become unmarriable. That night, Genevieve locked herself in her bedchamber and began the grim work of destroying her own beauty. She possessed a natural, radiant allure, thick auburn hair, flawless porcelain skin, and striking emerald eyes. It all had to go. She started with walnuts. Boiling the shells, she created a dark, bitter juice. She applied it to her pristine skin, turning her complexion into a sallow, jaundiced yellow. She took soot from the fireplace and subtly darkened the skin under her eyes, creating deep, sickly hollows that made her look perpetually on the brink of death. She chopped her luxurious auburn hair into jagged, uneven layers, slicking it down with rancid pomade so it appeared greasy and thin. But physical ugliness was not enough for London's high society. Money often blinded men to physical flaws. She had to become socially repulsive. She ordered her maid, a fiercely loyal Irish girl named Bridget, to fetch gowns from the charity bins of cheapside, hideous bombazine fabrics in shades of mustard, puce, and mud brown. She deliberately had them tailored to fit poorly, patting one shoulder to give the illusion of a slight hunchback. When she debuted her new persona at breakfast the next morning, Lady Henrietta dropped her teacup, shattering the fine bone china. Percival gagged on his kippers. "What in God's name has happened to you?" Henrietta shrieked. Genevieve let out a wet, hacking cough, deliberately spraying a bit of spittle onto the polished mahogany table. "I feel dreadful, stepmother," she wheezed, adopting a nasal, grating tone. "A sudden affliction, of the Constitution. Percival pushed his chair back in disgust. She looks like a corpse dragged from the Thames. She is just trying to rebel, Henrietta hissed, eyes narrowing. It matters not. You will still marry her, Percival. I will, Percival sneered, pinching his nose, but not a day before her 22nd birthday. Let her rot in her own filth until I absolutely must touch her. I won't have society laughing at me for bedding a swamp witch. Genevieve lowered her head, hiding the triumphant spark in her emerald eyes. The trap was set. She just had to endure the humiliation for 3 years. By the spring of 1812, Genevieve was notoriously known as the Beast of Mayfair. At Almack's assembly rooms, the elite epicenter of London high society, she was a walking ghost. She would deliberately step on the toes of the few fortune hunters desperate enough to ask her to dance. She would chew her food with her mouth open, laugh at a volume that made dowagers clutch their pearls, and speak obsessively about imaginary sores on her legs. It was agonizing. Every sneer, every whispered insult behind unfurled fans, every cruel caricature drawn in the gossip rags chipped away at her soul. She watched other girls her age fall in love, share secret kisses in the gardens of Hyde Park, and dance until dawn. Genevieve sat in the dark corners, a voluntary prisoner in a cage of her own making, counting the days until November 1814. In January of 1814, London was in the grip of a historic freeze. The River Thames had completely frozen over, giving birth to the legendary Frost Fair. Tents, printing presses, and roasting pits were set up directly on the solid ice. It was here, amidst the shivering crowds and the scent of roasting chestnuts, that Arthur Pendleton, the Duke of Westmoreland, first laid eyes on the Beast of Mayfair. Arthur had only recently returned from the Peninsular War in Spain, a decorated cavalry commander who had fought under the Duke of Wellington at the Battle of Vittoria. Arthur was a man forged in the brutal reality of combat. He had seen empires crumble, men die in the mud, and the dark underbelly of human nature. Returning to London, he found the trivialities of the times, the gossip, the fashion, the desperate social climbing utterly suffocating. He was 30 years old, possessing immense wealth and power, but he harbored a cynical heart. He was standing near a vendor selling hot gin and gingerbread when he heard the cruel laughter. A group of young dandies, led by the obnoxious Lord Percival Finch, were entirely blocking the path of a young woman. Arthur watched with narrowed eyes. The woman was wrapped in a horrifyingly ugly, moth-eaten brown cloak. Her complexion looked like spoiled milk, her hair was a greasy tragedy beneath a crooked bonnet, and she walked with a pronounced, painful-looking limp. "Careful, gentlemen," Percival jeered to his sycophants. "Don't stand too close to my beloved cousin. I hear her affliction is highly contagious. She might cough up a lung onto your pristine boots." The men roared with laughter. Genevieve kept her head down, her shoulders hunched, enduring the abuse with a practiced, dull expression. She let out her signature rattling cough, causing the dandies to scatter in mock terror. Arthur felt a surge of disgust, not for the girl, but for the men tormenting her. He stepped forward to intervene, but then something extraordinary happened. As Genevieve limped past a fruit stall, a young boy running blindly through the crowd crashed into the stall, sending a heavy, wooden crate of winter apples toppling directly toward the girl's head. It happened in a fraction of a second. Arthur's military reflexes tensed, ready to shout a warning, but before he could even draw breath, the crippled girl moved. Her spine snapped perfectly straight. The painful limp vanished entirely. With the fluid, lightning-fast grace of a trained fencer, her hand shot out, catching the heavy crate mid-air by its corner, mere inches from her face. She held the immense weight with effortless balance, stabilized the crate, and gently pushed it back onto the vendor's table. Arthur froze. In that fleeting second, she turned her head. The drab bonnet slipped back just a fraction. Arthur saw a flash of eyes, not dull and sickly, but brilliant, piercing, predatory emerald green. Beneath the smeared, yellowed skin of her jawline, where the high collar of her cloak had rubbed the makeup away, Arthur caught a glimpse of flawless, moonlit porcelain skin. As quickly as the mask had slipped, it slammed back into place. Genevieve immediately slumped her shoulders. Adopted her terrible limp this time, Arthur noted with a sharp intake of breath, on her times left times leg, whereas she had been limping on her times right times just moments before and hobbled away into the crowd, coughing violently. Arthur stood rooted to the ice of the Thames. His heart, which had been numb since the battlefields of Spain, suddenly beat with a frantic, thrilling rhythm. It's a disguise, he realized, a slow, dangerous smile spreading across his handsome face. She is faking it, all of it. For the next 2 weeks, the Duke of Westmoreland became a shadow. He used his military espionage skills not to track French spies, but to observe Miss Genevieve Croft. He watched her at the theater, noting how she pretended to be deaf in her right ear, only to unconsciously flinch when a door slammed on that exact side of the room. He watched her at the park, observing how her greasy hair smelled faintly of expensive rosewater beneath the rancid pomade. He realized that the Beast of Mayfair was a meticulously constructed fortress. But why? What was a wealthy heiress hiding from? The answer became horrifyingly clear when he investigated her family. Arthur spent an afternoon at his private club, White's, plying a few gossiping lords with expensive port. He learned of Thomas Croft's will, of Lady Henrietta's draconian control, and of the impending forced nuptials to Lord Percival Finch, a man Arthur knew to be neck-deep in debt to dangerous men. Arthur realized Genevieve was not a tragic victim of deformity. She was a brilliant, desperate tactician, fighting a silent war for her own survival, and he found himself profoundly, irresistibly captivated. The climax of the winter season was the Duke of Devonshire's masquerade ball at his palatial estate in Piccadilly. The invitation was exclusive, the pinnacle of high society. Henrietta, ever sadistic, forced Genevieve to attend, determined to parade her hideous stepdaughter to ensure society knew Percival was doing the family a noble favor by taking her on. When Genevieve entered the ballroom, dressed in an appalling gown of puce velvet that looked like rotting plums, the glittering crowd parted. Whispers erupted behind feathered masks. Arthur was waiting. He wore a simple black domino mask, leaning against a marble pillar, his eyes locked on her. He watched her stumble perfectly, spilling a drop of lemonade on a dowager's dress to ensure her social isolation. She retreated to the darkest, coldest corner of the room, near the conservatory doors, hiding behind a massive potted fern. Arthur pushed off the pillar. It was time to break the siege. The orchestra struck up the chords of a scandalous new dance that had just crossed the channel, the waltz. It required partners to stand shockingly close, arms entwined. The floor filled with swirling silks and velvets. Genevieve closed her eyes, leaning her head against the cold glass of the conservatory window. Her skin itched furiously from the walnut juice and ash. Her back ached from holding the artificial hunch. Only 8 more months. 8 months until she turned 22. She repeated the mantra in her head like a prayer. You look as though you are planning a murder, Miss Croft, or perhaps an escape. Genevieve's eyes snapped open. Standing before her was a man of terrifying presence, broad-shouldered, impossibly tall, and dressed in immaculate evening wear that bespoke quiet old money. He wore a black mask, but it could not hide the sharp, aristocratic line of his jaw, or the intense, piercing blue of his eyes. She immediately deployed her defenses. She hunched her padded shoulder, let her jaw slacken, and produced her most repulsive, wet cough. I beg your pardon, my lord, she wheezed nasally. I am dreadfully contagious tonight. I should hate to infect your fine cravat. The man didn't flinch. He didn't step back in disgust like all the others. Instead, he took a step closer, invading her personal space, smelling of crisp winter air, leather, and sandalwood. I have survived the cannons of the French army, Miss Croft. I imagine I can survive a bout of the sniffles. Dance with me. Genevieve stared at him, genuinely shocked. You wish to dance with me? Sir, you must be inebriated. Sober as a judge, Arthur replied smoothly, extending a white-gloved hand. Arthur Pendleton, Duke of Westmoreland, and I do not ask twice. A gasp rippled through the immediate vicinity. The Duke of Westmoreland, the wealthiest, most eligible, and most unapproachable bachelor in England, was asking the Beast of Mayfair to waltz? Across the room, Lady Henrietta's jaw practically unhinged. Percival dropped his glass of champagne. Genevieve panicked. If she refused a duke, Henrietta would punish her severely. If she accepted, she risked exposing her ruse under the close physical scrutiny of the waltz. Seeing no way out, she placed her hand in his. Arthur led her to the center of the floor. The other dancers literally stopped to stare. The music swelled, and Arthur pulled her into the hold. His hand was warm and terrifyingly firm on her waist. Genevieve immediately initiated her sabotage. She stepped heavily, aiming her heel squarely for the Duke's polished boots, but Arthur anticipated it. With athletic grace, he shifted his weight, pivoting her smoothly so her foot hit empty air. She tried to slouch out of his grip. He applied pressure to the small of her back, his fingers pressing precisely against her spine, forcing her to stand upright. "Your limp was on the left leg at the Frost Fair, Miss Croft," Arthur murmured, his lips brushing dangerously close to her ear. "Tonight, as you walked to the floor, it was on the right. A miraculous migration of affliction, wouldn't you say?" Genevieve's blood ran ice cold. Her heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird. I do not know what you mean, Your Grace. The pain radiates." "Fascinating," Arthur countered, spinning her effortlessly, his eyes locked onto hers with predatory focus. "And the walnut juice you use to stain your skin. It is very clever. But you missed a spot behind your left ear. And the hunch in your shoulder? It is composed of horsehair padding. I can feel it shifting under my hand." Genevieve stopped breathing. The room spun, and it wasn't from the waltz. He knows. God in heaven, he knows. If he exposed her right here, right now, Henrietta would legally force the marriage to Percival tomorrow. It would all be over. 3 years of torture, for nothing. Tears of absolute terror welled in her emerald eyes, washing away the soot she had painted beneath her lashes. "Please," she whispered, her real voice slipping out soft, melodic, and trembling with genuine fear. "Please, Your Grace, you don't understand." Arthur felt a sudden, sharp pang in his chest at the sheer terror in her voice. He had intended to play a game of wits, but the raw desperation in her eyes sobered him. Without breaking rhythm, he steered her out of the circle of dancers, gliding seamlessly through the open French doors and into the dimly lit, humid expanse of the Devonshire Conservatory. The heavy glass doors shut behind them, muting the music and the gossiping crowd. They were surrounded by towering exotic palms and the heavy scent of orchids. Arthur released her waist but caught her wrists, pinning them gently but immovably to her sides so she couldn't flee. "Who are you hiding from?" Arthur demanded, his voice dropping its playful edge, replacing it with the commanding tone of a general. Genevieve struggled against his grip, her chest heaving. "Let me go! If you ruin this for me, he will kill me!" "Who?" Arthur barked. "Finch? That pathetic worm?" "My stepmother," Genevieve cried out, her composure shattering completely. "If they know I am well, if they know I am whole, they will force the marriage to Percival. He will drain my father's company dry, and I will be disposed of. I only have 8 months left until I turn 22 and inherit my freedom. You cannot expose me. I beg of you, take whatever money you want. I will pay you when I am of age. Just keep my secret." She was crying now, the tears carving clean porcelain streaks through the yellow-brown makeup on her cheeks. Arthur stared down at her, his heart clenching. He reached into his breast pocket, withdrew a pristine linen handkerchief, and slowly, gently, brought it to her face. He wiped it firmly across her cheekbone. Genevieve froze, trembling under his touch as the rough fabric wiped away years of grime. Arthur looked at the handkerchief, stained brown and black, and then back at the breathtaking, flawless skin he had revealed beneath. She was, without question, the most beautiful woman he had ever seen. But it was her brilliant, ruthless mind that had already conquered him. "I do not want your money, Miss Croft," Arthur said softly, his thumb lightly brushing the clean skin of her cheek. "Then what do you want?" she whispered, terrified. I want access to your father's shipping logs, Arthur replied, his tone shifting to pure business. For the past 6 months, the Crown has been tracking a massive smuggling ring supplying French sympathizers. The contraband is moving through London docks, and the prime suspect is your dear cousin, Lord Percival Finch. But he is using your father's ships to do it. Genevieve's eyes widened in shock. Percival is smuggling treasonous goods. Yes, Arthur said, but I cannot prove it without the ledgers kept in the safe of your Grosvenor Square home. A safe Lady Henrietta fiercely guards. I need someone on the inside. And if I help you? Genevieve asked, her mind racing, calculating the odds. If you help me, Arthur smiled, a dangerous, brilliant flash of white teeth in the dim light, I will provide you with the ultimate protection against Lady Henrietta and Lord Finch. What protection? Arthur stepped back, offering her a mocking, elegant bow. You are going to tell your stepmother that the Duke of Westmoreland has been utterly bewitched by the beast of Mayfair. Miss Croft, you and I are going to enter into a very public, very fake engagement. The morning following the Duke of Devonshire's masquerade, the Croft townhouse was a battlefield of shattered nerves. Lady Henrietta paced the length of the morning room, the hem of her silk dressing gown whipping like a serpent's tail. Lord Percival slouched on a velvet settee, nursing a brutal hangover with a glass of brandy, his eyes bloodshot and narrow. Genevieve sat quietly in the corner, her padded shoulder hunched, her skin freshly stained with the bitter walnut juice. She let out a practiced, rattling cough. It is a trick, Henrietta hissed, her manicured fingers clawing at the lace at her throat. It must be some cruel wager at White's. The Duke of Westmoreland does not court deformed wretches. He is mocking us. Before Percival could offer a slurred agreement, the heavy brass knocker on the front door echoed through the hall. Moments later, the Crofts' butler, a stiff man named Higgins, appeared in the doorway, his face utterly drained of color. Your ladyship, Higgins stammered. His Grace, the Duke of Westmoreland, is in the drawing-room. He brings flowers. For Miss Genevieve. Percival dropped his brandy glass. It shattered against the hearth. Arthur played his part with the terrifying brilliance of a master tactician. When Henrietta and Percival rushed into the drawing-room, they found the formidable Duke leaning casually against the mantelpiece. He was dressed in immaculate morning attire, holding a massive, ostentatious bouquet of black dahlias and blood-red roses, a slightly macabre arrangement that perfectly suited the grim aesthetic Genevieve had cultivated. Westmoreland, Percival choked out, trying to puff out his chest. To what do we owe this? Highly unusual intrusion. Arthur's ice-blue eyes swept over Percival with the casual disdain one might reserve for a squashed insect. Then he looked at Genevieve, who limped heavily into the room. Arthur's face softened into a masterclass of fabricated, eccentric adoration. I have come to call upon Miss Croft, Arthur declared, his deep voice carrying absolute authority. I found our waltz last evening utterly intoxicating. Society bores me with its identical simpering debutantes. But Genevieve... He crossed the room, taking her yellowed, supposedly sickly hand and raising it to his lips. She is a creature of entirely unique fascination. I intend to make her my duchess. Henrietta physically swayed. The power dynamic of the household had instantly inverted. She was the guardian of an heiress, but she was entirely outranked by a duke of the realm. If Arthur wished to court Genevieve, forbidding it would mean social suicide and making an enemy of one of the most powerful men in England. Your Grace, Henrietta managed to say, forcing a sickly sweet smile. Genevieve is fragile, and she is practically promised to my nephew. Arthur's gaze snapped to Henrietta, cold and unyielding. Practically promised is not legally bound, madam. Unless you wish to challenge my suit. Percival shrank back into the shadows. No, your Grace. Of course not. Thus began the most bizarre courtship London had ever witnessed. To the absolute horror of the times, Tun, the Duke of Westmoreland, was seen everywhere with the Beast of Mayfair. They rode in his open-top phaeton through Hyde Park, Genevieve hunched under a hideous brown parasol, while Arthur pointedly ignored the staring crowds. They attended the opera, sitting in his private box, where Arthur would lean in close to her supposedly deaf ear, whispering things that made the heiress flush beneath her walnut-stained skin. But behind the charade, the true mission was underway. Their romantic rendezvous were, in reality, strategy meetings. In the safety of Arthur's heavily guarded carriage, Genevieve would finally sit up straight. With a soft, damp cloth provided by the Duke, she would wipe the grime from her face, revealing the breathtaking, radiant woman beneath. "Your cousin is getting sloppy," Arthur murmured one rainy Tuesday afternoon as their carriage rattled through the cobblestones of Covent Garden. He gently reached out, his thumb catching a streak of ash Genevieve had missed near her temple. His touch was warm, sending a dangerous, electric thrill down her spine. "My contacts at the docks confirm a shipment of French cognac and unlicensed gunpowder was moved off one of your father's vessels, the Times Sea Nymph, 3 nights ago." Genevieve shivered, not from the damp air, but from his proximity. The ledgers for the Times, Sea Nymph Times, are kept in the master's safe, in my father's old study. Henrietta keeps the key on a velvet ribbon around her neck. She only takes it off to bathe. "Can you get to it?" Arthur asked, his blue eyes searching her real, emerald ones. He hated asking her to take the risk, but he knew her sharp, resilient mind was their only advantage inside the house. "Bridget, my maid, draws her bath on Thursday evenings," Genevieve whispered. "Henrietta leaves her dressing gown on the chaise. I will need 10 minutes. If you are caught, I will not be there to protect you, Genevieve," Arthur warned, his voice thick with a sudden fierce protectiveness. He realized, with a jolt, that this was no longer just an assignment for the crown. The thought of Henrietta or Percival harming her made his blood run cold. Genevieve offered a small, defiant smile. "I have survived 3 years as a monster, Arthur. I can survive 10 minutes as a thief." Thursday evening arrived with a suffocating, tense silence in the Croft household. At exactly 8 o'clock, Genevieve slipped out of her bedchamber. She had foregone her padding and heavy bombazine, wearing a simple, dark cotton shift that allowed her to move like a shadow. She crept down the corridor. The floorboards of the old house were a minefield, but she knew exactly which ones creaked. She pressed herself against the flock wallpaper as she neared Henrietta's suite. Through the crack in the door, she heard the splash of water and her stepmother's demanding voice berating the maid. Genevieve slipped inside the antechamber. There, draped carelessly over the velvet chaise lounge, was Henrietta's silk dressing gown. Genevieve's heart hammered a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She reached into the pocket. Her fingers brushed cold metal. The safe key. She pulled it out, silently retreated from the room, and sprinted down the grand staircase to the ground floor. Her father's study was a cavernous room smelling of stale tobacco and old leather. She knelt before the heavy iron safe hidden behind a mahogany panel. Her hands shook as she inserted the key. With a heavy Times clack, the mechanism turned. She pulled out the heavy, leather-bound ledgers, turning to the pages dated for the last 6 months. Her eyes scanned the columns. There it was, the Sea Nymph. Goods unloaded in the dead of night, signatures forged by Percival Finch, and staggering sums of money unaccounted for bribes paid to French officials. It was irrefutable proof of high treason. Genevieve quickly copied the dates, sums, and names onto a piece of parchment she had brought with her. She was just about to close the ledger when a loose, folded piece of stationery slipped from the back pages and fluttered to the Persian rug. Genevieve picked it up. It was not a shipping manifest. It was a letter addressed to Henrietta from an apothecary in Cheapside. "Lady Croft," the letter read, "the tincture of nightshade and arsenic you requested has been delivered. Administered in small doses over a month, it will mimic a natural failure of the heart, as requested. Leave the remainder of my payment behind the loose brick in the alley." The date on the letter was October 1811, 1 month before her father, Lord Thomas Croft, had suddenly collapsed of a mysterious heart affliction. Genevieve stopped breathing. The room spun wildly. Henrietta hadn't just stolen her future, she had murdered her father. A sudden, sharp click echoed in the silence of the study. It was the sound of a pistol hammer being cocked. "You always were too clever for your own good, cousin," a voice sneered from the doorway. Genevieve whipped around. Standing in the entrance, a candle in one hand and a dueling pistol in the other, was Lord Percival Finch. Percival's face was a mask of drunken malice. He stepped fully into the room, locking the heavy oak door behind him. I wondered why the Duke of Westmoreland was suddenly so fascinated by a gargoyle. Percival spat, his eyes darting to the open safe and the letter trembling in Genevieve's hand. He is an investigator for the crown, isn't he? And you are his little spy. Genevieve backed away slowly, clutching the letter to her chest. Her mind raced. The athletic reflexes she had hidden for 3 years coiled tightly in her muscles. He killed him, Percival, Genevieve said, her voice dropping its nasal affectation, ringing out clear and cold. Henrietta poisoned my father, and you knew. Of course I knew. Percival laughed darkly. Uncle Thomas was going to leave everything to you immediately upon his death. Henrietta convinced him to sign the codicil giving her control, and then she ensured his early demise. And once you and I were married, the shipping fleet would be entirely mine. But you had to make yourself so entirely repulsive that I couldn't bear to look at you, let alone bed you. So we waited. He raised the pistol, aiming it directly at her heart. But we are out of time. Treason is a hanging offense. I cannot let you give those ledgers to Westmoreland. You will tragically trip and break your neck on the stairs tonight, cousin. A terrible accident for the clumsy beast. If you kill me, you get nothing. Genevieve stalled, her eyes desperately scanning the room for a weapon. The inheritance goes to charity if I die before 22. A minor inconvenience, Percival shrugged. I will be in France with my smuggled gold long before the solicitors sort it out. He tightened his finger on the trigger. Genevieve didn't wait for the spark. With explosive speed, she grabbed the heavy brass inkwell from the desk and hurled it with devastating precision directly at Percival's face. The heavy brass struck his temple with a sickening crack just as the pistol fired. The gunshot deafened the room, the bullet splintering the mahogany paneling mere inches from Genevieve's head. Percival stumbled backward, dropping the candle, blood pouring down the side of his face. Genevieve didn't hesitate. She vaulted over the desk, grabbing the fire poker from the hearth. But before she could strike, the locked study door exploded inward, with a deafening crash of splintering oak. Through the ruined doorway stepped the Duke of Westmoreland. He held a massive smoking pistol in his right hand, having literally shot the lock off the door. Behind him swarmed a half-dozen Bow Street runners in dark coats. Arthur's eyes immediately found Genevieve. Seeing she was unharmed, his terrifying, icy gaze locked onto Percival, who was groaning on the floor. Lord Finch, Arthur said, his voice dropping to a lethally quiet register. You are under arrest for high treason against the crown, and, it appears, for the attempted murder of my fiancée. The runners hauled Percival to his feet. Within minutes, the house was swarming with authorities. Henrietta was dragged from her bedchamber, shrieking in fury and denial, until Arthur personally presented her with the apothecary's letter. Her screams turned to sudden, horrified silence as she realized she was going to the gallows. In the chaos, Arthur walked over to Genevieve. She dropped the fire poker, her hands shaking violently as the adrenaline left her system. Without a word, Arthur pulled her into his chest, wrapping his heavy wool overcoat around her shivering shoulders. I have you, he murmured fiercely into her dark hair. It's over. The siege is broken, Genevieve. You won. Genevieve buried her face in his lapel, breathing in the scent of sandalwood and gunpowder, and wept. Not tears of fear, but of profound, overwhelming relief. 8 months later, the 2nd of November, 1814, the bells of St. George's Church in Hanover Square rang out, shaking the autumn leaves from the trees. The streets were packed with onlookers, and the pews were overflowing with the absolute elite of London society. Everyone had come to witness the bizarre spectacle, the marriage of the heroic Duke of Westmoreland to the Beast of Mayfair. The gossip had run rampant. Henrietta and Percival had been quietly tried and imprisoned for treason. The murder plot kept out of the papers to protect the Croft shipping empire. But the Times, Times, still believed Genevieve was the tragic, hideous creature they had mocked for years. Arthur stood at the altar, looking devastatingly handsome in his formal military dress uniform. A knowing, arrogant smile played on his lips. The heavy church doors swung open. The organ music swelled. A collective gasp swept through the church. It started in the back pews and rushed forward like a tidal wave. Fans dropped. Monocles fell from eyes. Dowagers clutched the wooden pews in shock. Walking down the aisle was not a hunched, yellow-skinned wretch. Genevieve Croft moved with the grace of a queen. Her luxurious auburn hair, finely grown out, cascaded in rich, shining curls down her back, woven with diamonds. Her skin was the color of fresh cream, flushed with a healthy, radiant pink. Her emerald eyes sparkled with triumph and joy. She wore a gown of pure white silk, embroidered with silver thread that caught the candlelight, fitting her perfect upright posture flawlessly. She was a vision of absolute, unmatched beauty. Arthur watched her walk toward him, his heart swelling with a fierce, possessive pride. He took her hand as she reached the altar, his thumb brushing over her knuckles. "You look disappointed, Your Grace," Genevieve whispered playfully, her eyes dancing. "Did you prefer the puce velvet?" Arthur leaned in close, his lips brushing her ear. "I prefer the woman beneath the ash, the one who outsmarted them all." As the vicar began the ceremony, Genevieve looked out at the shocked, open-mouthed faces of the society that had tormented her. She had survived her prison, she had protected her empire, and she had found a man who loved her mind before he ever truly saw her face. The Beast of Mayfair was dead, and the Duchess of Westmoreland had risen. If you were captivated by Genevieve's brilliant deception and the Duke who loved her true self, hit that like button. We release thrilling, dramatic historical stories just like this every single week. Don't forget to share this video with your fellow romance lovers and subscribe to our channel so you never miss out on the scandals, secrets, and breathtaking twists of high society. What would you do to escape a forced marriage? Tell us in the comments below.